The wind howled across the Montana plains like a wounded animal, carrying with it the bite of early winter and the promise of a storm that wouldn't show mercy.
Please let me in.
Jacob Morrison had
It's
seen
too cold
73
out
winters
here.
in his life, and he knew the signs: the way the horses grew restless in their stalls, the peculiar copper taste in the air, the silence that fell over the ranch just before nature unleashed its fury. He'd spent the evening securing the barn, checking on his small herd of cattle, and making sure the generator had enough fuel. His wife, Mary, had been gone 5 years now, and the ranch that once bustled with family and farmhands felt emptier with each passing season. His children had moved to cities with names that sounded foreign to his tongue: Seattle, Denver, Austin, pursuing dreams that didn't include dirt under their fingernails or the smell of hay at dawn. The knock came at 9:47 p.m., so sudden and desperate that Jacob nearly dropped his coffee mug. In all his years on this isolated stretch of land, 20 miles from the nearest town, visitors after dark were as rare as rain in July. He moved toward the door with the caution of a man who'd learned that unexpected things were rarely good things. His arthritic hand reached for the rifle he kept by the entrance, more from habit than genuine fear. When he pulled open the heavy wooden door, the wind nearly tore it from his grasp, and standing in the porch light was a sight that made his breath catch in his throat. She couldn't have been more than 19 or 20, her dark skin glistening with a mixture of rain and tears, her clothes, a thin jacket and jeans, wholly inadequate for the weather that was descending upon them. Her car, he could see now, was pulled haphazardly into his driveway, steam rising from under the hood like a dying breath. She was shivering so violently that her words came out broken, fragmented. "Please, sir," she managed, her voice barely audible over the wind. "My fire died, my car, the heater. I've been driving for hours and may I stay? Just until morning. I have money, I can pay." Jacob saw something in her eyes that pierced through all his learned caution, all the warnings he'd heard about strangers and dangers. He saw the same fear he'd seen in Mary's eyes the night their youngest had been rushed to the hospital, the same desperation he'd felt when the bank threatened to take the ranch during the drought of '88. But more than fear, he saw something else, a stubborn determination not to give up, even as her body betrayed her with its violent shaking. Without a word, he stepped aside, pulling the door wider. "Get in here before you freeze to death," he said, his voice gruffer than he intended, a defense mechanism against the emotions stirring in his chest. She stumbled inside, and as Jacob closed the door against the storm, he noticed her backpack, worn and carefully patched, the kind of bag that spoke of long journeys and limited resources. She stood dripping on his entry rug, looking utterly lost, utterly vulnerable, and utterly grateful. "I'm Amara," she said, extending a trembling hand. "Thank you. Thank you so much. I promise I won't be any trouble. I just need somewhere warm until the storm passes." Jacob took her hand, surprised by the strength in her grip despite the trembling. "Jacob Morrison," he replied. "And we need to get you warmed up before we worry about anything else." Jacob built up the fire in the stone fireplace while Amara stood as close to it as safety allowed, her arms wrapped around herself. He brought her one of Mary's old robes, soft flannel that still smelled faintly of lavender from the sachets his wife had loved, and a pile of blankets. "Bathrooms down the hall," he said, pointing. "Get out of those wet clothes. I'll make something hot to drink." When she emerged 20 minutes later, the color had begun to return to her face, though her eyes still held that haunted look of someone who'd been running on empty for far too long. He'd made hot chocolate, the real kind, with milk and cocoa and a touch of cinnamon, the way Mary used to make it, and set out some leftover cornbread and stew. Amara's eyes widened at the sight of food, and Jacob realized with a pang that she was hungrier than she'd let on. "Eat," he commanded gently, and she didn't need to be told twice. As she ate with the focused intensity of genuine hunger, Jacob found himself studying her. There was something about her presence that filled the empty spaces of the house in a way he hadn't felt in years. "Where were you headed?" he asked finally, settling into his worn leather chair across from where she sat on the couch, the fire casting dancing shadows across both their faces. Amara looked up from her bowl, and for a moment, Jacob thought she might not answer. Then, slowly, she began to speak. Medical school, she said softly. University of Washington. I got accepted on a full scholarship. It's always been my dream, to be a doctor, to help people who can't afford healthcare, to go back to communities like the one I grew up in where the nearest hospital is an hour away and people die from things that shouldn't kill anyone in the 21st century. She paused, her fingers wrapped around the mug of hot chocolate as if it were a lifeline. I've been driving from Alabama for 3 days, sleeping in my car to save money. Everything I own is in that backpack. My grandmother raised me after my parents died when I was 7, car accident, and she worked 3 jobs to make sure I could focus on school. She passed away 6 months ago, right after I got my acceptance letter. She never got to see me go. Amara's voice cracked, and she took a shaky breath. I promised her I'd make it. That I wouldn't let anything stop me. But my car, it's been struggling for the last 500 miles, and when the heater died tonight, in this storm, I thought. She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Jacob felt something shift in his chest, like ice breaking up on a spring river. He thought of his own children, who'd had every advantage, every opportunity, and who'd still chosen paths that led them away from home. He thought of his wife, who'd always said that the measure of a person wasn't in what they had but in what they did with whatever they were given. My wife was a teacher, he said quietly, surprising himself by speaking. Taught at the reservation school 30 miles east of here for 40 years. She used to say that education was the only inheritance that couldn't be stolen or taxed or lost to bad luck. He smiled, a sad, remembering smile. She would have liked you. They talked deep into the night as the storm raged outside, the wind battering the old ranch house while the fire kept them warm and safe. Amara told him about growing up in rural Alabama, about the brilliant teacher who'd seen her potential and pushed her toward science, about studying by flashlight when the electricity was cut off, about her grandmother's calloused hands and unwavering faith. Jacob found himself sharing stories he hadn't told in years, about building the ranch with Mary, about the cattle drive where he'd nearly lost his life, about the daughter who'd wanted to be a veterinarian but became a corporate lawyer instead, about the loneliness of the empty rooms and the weight of memories. Amara woke to the smell of bacon and coffee, disoriented for a moment before remembering where she was. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed by fresh snow, crystalline and pure in the early morning light. She found Jacob in the kitchen, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd cooked for himself for a long time. "How'd you sleep?" he asked without turning around, and she realized he'd heard her footsteps. "Better than I have in months," she admitted, and it was true. The couch had been more comfortable than her car, the house warmer than anywhere she'd been, but more than that, she'd felt safe in a way she hadn't felt since her grandmother died. Over breakfast, eggs, bacon, toast, and strong black coffee, Amara reluctantly brought up the subject of her car. "I should probably call a mechanic," she said, trying to keep the worry out of her voice. She had $247 in her bank account, just enough to get her to Seattle if everything went perfectly, which it clearly hadn't. "I can take a look at it first," Jacob offered. "Worked on engines my whole life. Might be something simple." But when they went outside and he popped the hood, his expression told her everything she needed to know. "Radiator's cracked," he said finally. "Looks like the engine might have overheated too. You're going to need parts, maybe a whole new radiator, and someone to install it properly." Amara felt her carefully constructed composure begin to crumble. She did the math quickly: a new radiator, installation, possibly engine work. It would cost more than she had, more than she could afford, more than she could borrow. Her dream of making it to Seattle for orientation, of starting medical school on time, of honoring her grandmother's sacrifice, suddenly seemed impossibly far away. She turned away from Jacob, not wanting him to see the tears that were threatening to fall, but her shoulders shook with the effort of holding them back. "Hey now," Jacob said, his weathered hand landing gently on her shoulder. "Don't give up yet. Let me make some calls." What happened over the next few hours would stay with Amara for the rest of her life. Jacob called his old friend Pete, who ran the auto shop in town, and explained the situation with a directness that brooked no argument. "I'll cover the parts," Jacob said, and when Amara started to protest, he held up his hand. "You can pay me back when you're a fancy doctor." But Pete had other ideas. "Tell that girl I'll do the labor for free," she heard Pete say over the speakerphone. "My daughter wants to be a doctor too. Lord knows we need more doctors who give a damn about regular people." Then Jacob called the diner, and somehow the story spread. The owner, Maria, insisted on sending over food for Amara's journey. His neighbor, Mrs. Chen, appeared with a heavy winter coat that had belonged to her daughter. "She's in California now, doesn't need it," she said with a knowing smile. By afternoon, people Amara had never met were stopping by the ranch. Tom Richards from the feed store brought a care package of snacks and water bottles. The pastor from the church Mary had attended brought a gas card with $200 on it. The congregation wanted to help, he explained simply. Young Sarah Miller, who was studying nursing at community college, brought a stethoscope that had belonged to her late father. "He was a paramedic," she said shyly. "He always said the tools should go to someone who'd use them to help people." Amara was overwhelmed, unable to process the generosity of these strangers who asked for nothing in return, who saw her not as an outsider or a risk but as someone worth investing in. Jacob watched it all with quiet satisfaction, and when the last visitor had left and Amara finally broke down crying, not from sadness now but from the sheer overwhelming weight of human kindness, he sat beside her on the porch steps. "Why?" she asked through her tears. "Why are you all doing this? You don't even know me." Jacob was quiet for a long moment, watching the sun begin its descent toward the mountains. "My wife used to say that we're all just walking each other home," he said finally. "Sometimes the path is easy, and sometimes it's hard, but we're not meant to walk it alone. You knocked on my door last night, but the truth is, I needed you just as much as you needed me." The car was ready by the next morning. Pete had worked late into the night, refusing to let Amara leave later than necessary. As Jacob drove her into town to pick it up, Amara felt a strange reluctance to leave, as if this remote ranch and this gruff old rancher had become a temporary home in a way she hadn't expected. "I'll pay you back," she promised as they drove. "Every penny. I'll keep track of it all." Jacob glanced at her, one eyebrow raised. "You'll do no such thing," he said firmly. "What you'll do is become the best damn doctor you can be. You'll help people who need it. And someday, when someone knocks on your door asking for help, you'll remember this and you'll open it. That's how you pay it back." At the auto shop, Pete handed her the keys with a grin. "Changed the oil too," he said. "And checked all the fluids. You should make it to Seattle no problem." Maria from the diner had packed what looked like enough food for a week. Mrs. Chen had included hand warmers in the coat pockets. Sarah had written her phone number on a card tucked in with the stethoscope. "Let me know when you graduate. I'll be there." Amara stood in the middle of all this generosity, this outpouring of faith from people who had no reason to believe in her except that they chose to, and she understood something profound about the nature of humanity that all her years of studying had never taught her. Before she left, she and Jacob stood by her car, running smoothly now, warm air blowing from the vents, and the words she wanted to say felt inadequate. "I don't know how to thank you," she began, but Jacob shook his head. "You already have," he said, and his eyes were suspiciously bright. "This house has been quiet for a long time. Too quiet. You reminded me what it was for, not just shelter from the storm, but a place where people can find their way. Mary would have been proud to know her home still serves that purpose." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small photograph, worn at the edges. It showed a younger Jacob and a beautiful woman with kind eyes, standing in front of the ranch house. "That's Mary," he said. "Keep it. And remember, one bed was all you needed. Sometimes that's how grace works. Just enough, right when you need it most." Amara hugged him then, this stranger who'd become so much more than that in just 2 days, and she felt his arms tighten around her in a fatherly embrace that she'd missed desperately since her grandmother died. "I'll write to you," she promised. "I'll tell you everything, about school, about becoming a doctor, about all of it." Jacob smiled, a real smile that transformed his weathered face. "You better," he said. "And when you have your white coat ceremony, you send me a picture. I want to see it." As Amara drove away, watching the ranch grow smaller in her rearview mirror, she understood that she was carrying more than just supplies and a fixed car. She was carrying the faith of an entire community, the blessing of strangers who become family, and the profound lesson that humanity's greatest power lies not in what we keep for ourselves but in what we give away. The road stretched before her, leading to Seattle, to medical school, to the future she'd fought so hard to reach. But now she traveled with something more valuable than money or security. She carried the knowledge that the world, despite all its hardness and cruelty, still held pockets of extraordinary grace. That kindness wasn't naive or weak but was perhaps the strongest force in the universe. That a knock on a door in a storm could change 2 lives, not just one. That one bed, one meal, one moment of compassion could ripple outward in ways impossible to measure. And she carried the memory of a rancher who'd opened his door when he could have kept it closed, who'd chosen to see not a stranger but a fellow traveler on the long road home. Years later, Dr. Amara Johnson would open a free clinic in rural Alabama, serving the same community that had shaped her. On the wall of her office, beside her medical degree, hung a photograph of an old ranch house in Montana and a note that read, "One bed. That's all it takes to change a life. Pass it on." And she did, over and over again, becoming for others what Jacob Morrison had been for her, a light in the darkness, a refuge in the storm, a reminder that humanity at its core is not about what divides us but about what we choose to share when someone knocks on our door asking for help. The story of that night became legend in both towns, a reminder that our greatest legacy is not what we accumulate but what we give away, and that sometimes the most profound moments of our lives arrive unexpectedly, in the form of a knock at the door and the choice to answer it with an open heart.